Hello, hello, hello. Checking in with the library book. Holy crap! This is my first first day of the library book by Susan Orleans, a 2018 novel, not novel, nonfiction book, ostensibly kind of circling around the event in 1986 where uh, a fire was apparently set. It looks like it was set. It was a intentional arson fire was set in the Los Angeles Public Library. It consumed over 400,000 books. Another untold number of books was also damaged, basically, done in. Um, and I've listened to, good Lord, 13 chapters of this book. And they're, some of them are shorter chapters, but I'm kind of closing in on like halfway part of this book, and wow, it is a really good book, really well done. It Susan Orlean is someone who um, has that fruitful, curious mind of a good nonfiction writer, because yes, she looks into one of the main suspects, a kind of failed bullshitter, failed actor who is suspected of doing the fire, kind of tracing his history, his family's history, just kind of a sad kind of life of being a good-looking bullshitter in a small town, coming to New York, coming to Los Angeles, and finding out, yep, he's dime a dozen. Haven't really kind of delved into like what might be his motivations for this, but we're probably going to slowly circle back, because the joy of Susan Orlean is she goes off in different directions. There is like how the community kind of rallied, raised money for this. Some really interesting characters there. A religious guy, figure guy, bizarre religious figure guy who swears and says, like, you should, if you don't give me if you don't give donate money to my church, you might as well just turn your head up into the sky and barf into your own mouth. Just magnetic. Sounds like a YouTube personality in the making, in how he is able to squeeze money from his patrons, who takes on, they do a whole um, kind of a Jerry Lewis style telethon for the library, which with all sorts of different people, all sorts of different powerful people there. Charlton Heston, Zsa Zsa Gabor forgets to bring a book to read, of course. Um, I just that so we get all that, but we also kind of get into just sort of the minutia of, not minutia, but just sort of the day to day running of a library, and their shipping department. They're basically kind of shipping like a full, like almost a full library worth of books all around. Is in on constant motion from uh, from um, from branch to branch, with the central branch being the kind of the hub where everything goes through. Um, we have her interviewing the guy who was the head of the public library at that time, and at first he refused to talk to me because he was writing his own book, but then he then proceeded to talk to me for like an hour, kind of very combatively, and we had multiple things that all started out like this, and then he just talked and talked and talked, and I had to invent reasons to leave, because, like, I needed to go pick up my kids, or get or my hand was hurting from taking notes. um, so there's that. She goes back into the history of the library, like, how it started, and just like, and this was a time when, yes, Native American people were being busted for vagrancy, and then basically sold and forced to work off the money. And this was something that kept like basically indentured, enslaved. And this kept on going until like 1936. But kind of going through all the kind of the interesting people in the library, just the whole thing of like this was actually a profession that fairly soon became something that was open to women. However, they have a couple of cases where, well, one case where they fire a woman because it was like, well, your father has now got enough money that you don't need a job anymore, so we're firing you for that reason. And then another one where it's like, well, we think a man should be running this library, even though the woman who was running it was doing a perfectly good job. Um, though the guy that actually goes in there, Lummis, was just a he was really eccentric, really like um, no experience in library. He walked from his place in Ohio to L.A. Writing letters in a column. Great self promoter, um, but also had like multiple love affairs. Would always be going off on fishing trips. Though at the same time, it sounds like he did a lot of stuff to like establish the LA library system as a research library system. So he actually, Orleans, it's like he was pretty fucking wacky, but he also actually was somebody who actually did a lot of stuff. But in the end, he also signed bad leases, and his personal life was always in fucking chaos. In the end, even his friend, he alienated the friends that would keep him around. So he was in there for 6 years, which was, I guess, not too bad. Um, but yeah, you get the whole thing of the female librarians and kind of the suffragette movement at the time. So yeah, just really, really fascinating stuff. I just keep on. I've been, it's one of these like, oh, I started listening to it as I was walking the dogs this morning, and I've just kept on going throughout the day, and it's like I've listened to almost like 6 hours of this now, and it's just like really well paced, really well structured. It's like I'm quite enjoying it. Maybe doesn't have like as much of an as seems like an emotional heart as the Orchid Thief, but yeah, and the central figure, kind of sad figure in that book, the Orchid Thief in that book. Um, but still, yeah, really, really interesting book. Really interesting book. Um, he would brand he it's Lummis would brand books. He would like books that he thought were just like just quackery. He would brand books because people were stealing books. So it's like people brand, and when they said you're defacing defacing books, it's like, no, I'm branding them like you would brand cattle. But he also put things in books saying like palmistry or other kind of quack science. He would put things in saying like he wanted to put something in it saying that it was basically, this is all bullshit and you shouldn't be reading this. But they said like you should probably, I think they toned it down to the point where it was like, this isn't really particularly scientific. For a better explanation of this stuff, why not try, and then there'd be a blank thing for the librarians to put in you know um, actual actual books that were more reputable and maybe more based on the scientific method. So yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a great thing where it's like it's an excuse to say, hey, this library burned down. The reason why it's like somewhat it's an obscure story is that it burned down at the same time that Chernobyl was happening, that the meltdown of the reactor in Chernobyl was happening, and obviously most of the world was riveted on that. I think Orleans makes the point that yeah, well, Pravda, or that was happy to devote lots of space to the burning down of the L.A. library because they didn't want to particularly acknowledge the gravity of what was happening in Chernobyl. So if you're a Russian, you might actually be aware of the L.A. book library burning that fire. But yeah, so it's one of these stories like, yeah, 1986, I would be, this is my final year in high school, and I had no idea about this story. So this most likely got shoved out of the way by Chernobyl. So it's a fascinating story, but a really good excuse to go into the particular history of this library, but also just sort of the thing of, the function of libraries, because there's talking about like a modern library. A lot of there was the head of the head librarian in the present day when Orleans is researching this is meeting up with the homeless coordinator of the city, because it's such a important place for the homeless, for so many different populations, you know, and one of those is definitely the homeless, and like trying to coordinate things of like, well, we're gonna stop prevent people from doing camping out, so you might get people bringing in large packs because they won't be able to, just store them at these camps, you know, all this sort of stuff. Just, yeah, really good, really good. All right, I will leave it there for right now. More videos later.